heartbreaking love story that will leave you speechless. When Hannah Grace gets abandoned at the altar with a cruel text message, she never expected to find true love in the most unexpected way. This emotional roller coaster follows her journey, from devastating betrayal to discovering a mysterious billionaire who sees her for who she truly is. Asterisk, hey there, romance lovers. Tonight we dive into a world where every choice has a cost and every moment matters. Let's dig in. Asterisk, the air outside the old stone church in downtown Seattle was crisped with the cool edge of late October. Maple leaves skittering across the steps, in quick spirals before catching against the carved wooden doors. Inside, golden light filtered through stained glass, painting the aisle in shades of ruby and amber. In the small anteroom beside the sanctuary, Hannah Grace stood before a full-length mirror, the satin of her wedding gown gleaming under warm bulbs above. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the skirt, breath unsteady despite the tight corset. That already restricted every inhale. She had imagined this day since she was a girl, but never quite like this. She had pictured her father's steady arms at her side, pews filled with smiling faces, the low hum of whispered excitement as the organist played. She had imagined Daniel waiting at the altar, tall and composed, eyes soft with the certainty of love. Reflection showed a different truth. Mascara already smudged at the corners of her eyes, lipstick slightly faded where she had bitten her lip, tension in her jaw that told the story of a woman holding herself together with fragile thread. The phone on the vanity buzzed once, then again. She hesitated, glancing at the door where her maid of honor had gone to check on last-minute details. Finally, she picked it up. The text was only a single sentence, each word as sharp as a blade. I cannot do this. I am sorry. I cannot marry someone like you. Her eyes moved over the message once, then again, as if repetition could change it. Her fingers went cold. The hum of voices in the sanctuary seemed to fade, replaced by the thud of her heartbeat in her ears. The silk bodice felt suddenly too tight. The world didn't tilt or spin. It simply stopped. She set the phone down with deliberate care, breath coming in shallow sips. Somewhere down the hall, the organist began the opening chords. Someone knocked gently on the door. Hannah could not move. The words repeated in her mind with merciless clarity. Someone like you. The meaning was not hidden. It had never been hidden. She had known the way Daniel's mother looked at her when she thought no one was watching. She had heard the careful jokes from his friends. She had felt the subtle but constant pressure to become less of herself in every possible way. Less outspoken, less visible, less... The knock came again, more insistent this time. She reached for the door, then stopped. Instead, she turned back to the mirror, searching for some trace of the joy she had expected to see today. The woman staring back was still Hannah Grace. Full-bodied, full-hearted, with eyes the color of fresh coffee and a smile that had been called too wide for her face. She saw the curve of her arms, the strength in her shoulders, the softness in her jaw. She saw a woman abandoned without warning, yet still standing. The voices outside grew louder. Someone called her name. She gathered the skirt in both hands and crossed to the side exit. The door opened to a narrow alley lined with brick walls damp from last night's rain. Cool air rushed over her skin, carrying the faint scent of roasted coffee from the cafe down the street. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked toward the main road, each step away from the church an unplanned act of survival. She did not notice the man at first. He was leaning against a black sedan parked near the curb, phone in one, hand the other resting loosely in his pocket. His suit was dark and impeccably cut, his tie the deep blue of a midnight sky. When she passed, something slipped from her wrist. The small silver heart-shaped pendant that had belonged to her mother landed on the sidewalk with a muted chime. Bent to pick it up, turning it once in his palm before stepping toward her. "You dropped this," he said, his voice calm and low. She took it from him, murmuring thanks without meeting his gaze. There was no judgment in his tone, no curiosity about the sight of a woman in a wedding gown walking alone through city streets. Only the steady presence of someone who, for reasons unknown, was simply there. She walked on, fingers closing around the pendant, the cool metal warming slowly against her skin. The image of his eyes followed her, not for their color or shape, but for the absence of the thing she feared most in moments like this: pity.
Ow.
It was the kind of moment that stopped the world until a stranger's gaze began to write. Another story. Hannah Grace had not planned what to do next. The church was behind her, the life she thought she was stepping into gone in a single sentence. She walked without direction through the streets of downtown Seattle, the white satin of her gown catching on uneven pavement, drawing stares from strangers who whispered to each other or lifted their phones for quick photos. By the time she reached the quiet waterfront, clouds had thickened over Elliott Bay, and fine mist settled on her hair and shoulders. She stopped at a bench facing the water, lowered herself onto the cold wood, and tried to breathe through the weight pressing against her chest. For 32 years, she had learned to live with people's opinions about her body, about what she should wear, eat, do, even who she should love. She had thought Daniel was different, that his proposal was proof love could see past numbers. On a scale, she had been wrong. She traced the outline of the silver pendant in her palm, remembering how her mother had clasped it around her neck when she turned 18. Her mother had been her fiercest protector, the one person who never asked her to shrink, who reminded her that beauty was not a narrow doorway only a few could fit through. Losing her 2 years ago to cancer had left a hollow ache that no friendship or romance had filled. A voice interrupted her thoughts, deep and steady. You left this behind once today. It would be a shame if you lost it again. She turned to see the man from the church steps. He stood a few feet away, an umbrella in one hand, the other gesturing toward the pendant she already held. I wanted to make sure you were all right, he said. She managed a polite nod. I'll be fine. His expression didn't change, though his eyes seemed to measure the truth of her words. If fine means sitting in the cold in a wedding dress without a coat, then maybe you are, he said quietly. She almost smiled despite herself. I guess fine is relative. He extended the umbrella. At least take this. She hesitated, then accepted it, feeling the weight of the black canopy settle into her. Grap. He inclined his head once, then stepped away, leaving her to the mist and the steady lap of water against the pier. A week passed. Hannah returned to her small apartment in Capitol Hill, traded the gown for jeans and a sweater, and tried to resume her freelance work designing interiors for small offices and apartments. She ignored texts from well-meaning friends asking if she wanted to talk, deleted the few photos that had surfaced online with captions like runaway bride or groom gets cold feet, and told herself the world would forget soon enough. On Tuesday morning, her inbox held an unfamiliar name, Ethan Whitmore. The email was brief, professional, offering payment that was 3 times her usual rate for a residential project. No mention of timelines, no questions about her portfolio. Just an address in Bellevue and a request to meet that afternoon. She almost deleted it. The timing felt too convenient, too strange. But the bank account that Daniel had cleaned out before his disappearing act left her little choice. The address led to a glass and steel tower overlooking Lake Washington. Penthouse elevator required a key card, which the concierge handed her with the kind of respectful nod reserved for expected guests. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that felt more like a gallery than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the lake in perfect rectangles of light. Furniture was minimal, expensive, and somehow cold despite its beauty. You came, said a familiar voice. She turned to find the man from the waterfront. He wore a charcoal sweater and dark jeans, the formal suit replaced by something that made him seem more human, though no less imposing. You're Ethan Whitmore, she said. Not quite a question, and you're Hannah Grace, though I suspect you're wondering how I know that. Her pulse quickened. Should I be concerned? He moved to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. That depends on whether you're the kind of person who runs from complicated situations. I seem to have a talent for that lately. He turned, and for the first time, she saw something beyond polite interest in his expression, something that looked almost like pain. I have a confession, he said. I didn't hire you for interior design. I hired you because I've been watching you for 3 months, and I think someone is trying to kill me. Hannah's first instinct was to run. Her second was to laugh, because the absurdity of her life had apparently reached new heights. She didn't either. Watching me for 3 months, she repeated slowly, "That's either the worst pickup line in history, or you're completely insane." Ethan moved to a wall panel, pressed something, and the glass dimmed to reveal hidden screens. Security footage flickered to life. Hannah at the grocery store, Hannah leaving her apartment, Hannah meeting clients. At coffee shops. Always at a distance, always careful, but unmistakably surveillance. "I'm not insane," he said quietly, "but I might be paranoid." She stared at the screens, a chill spreading through her chest. "Why me? What do you want?" 3 months ago. My business partner died in what the police called an accident. Marcus Wong was the most careful driver I knew, but somehow his brakes failed on a perfectly maintained car. 2 weeks later, someone broke into my office and stole only one thing. A client list that included your name. My name? I've never heard of you before today. You designed the offices for Huang and Associates 2 years ago. Marcus mentioned you once, said you had an eye for seeing what people needed even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. He turned off the screens. I think someone believes you saw something you shouldn't have. Hannah sank onto the nearest chair, mind racing. The Huang project had been straightforward, modern, clean lines for a financial consulting firm. She remembered Marcus as quiet, kind, the sort of man who brought his own coffee and thanked her for every small change. What kind of business were you in with him? Ethan's jaw tightened. The kind that makes enemies? That's not an answer. We moved money for people who preferred their finances to stay private. Some of those people are dangerous when they feel exposed. The implications hit her like cold water. You're talking about criminals. I'm talking about survival. He sat across from her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Someone has been systematically eliminating everyone who had access to certain information. One of the last names on that list. Hannah stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. Below, the lake stretched out in deceptive calm, hiding whatever depths lay beneath its surface. Even if that's true, why bring me here? Why not just warn me? 'Cause running only works if you have somewhere to go. His voice was gentle but firm. And because I need your help. She turned to face him. Help with what? Marcus hid something. Before he died, something that could identify the person trying to kill us both. I think it's in the office you designed for him, but I can't figure out where. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic far below. Hannah studied Ethan's face, searching for deception and finding only grim honesty. You're asking me to trust a stranger who's been stalking me for months. I'm asking you to trust someone who's trying to keep you alive. The weight of the decision settled on her shoulders. Everything logical told her to leave, to report him to the police, to disappear into whatever normal life she could rebuild. But she thought of Marcus Wong's kind smile, of the way he had talked about his daughter's college plans with such pride. What happened to his family? Protective custody. They're safe, but they can't come home until this ends. Hannah closed, her eyes feeling the echo of every choice that had led her to this moment. Daniel's cruelty had shattered one life, but perhaps it had also saved her from a worse fate. If I help you, I need the truth. All of it. Ethan nodded. Marcus and I laundered money for the Russian mob. We were trying to get out, had been for months. Someone in their organization found out and decided to tie up loose ends. How loose? Loose enough that they're willing to kill anyone who might have overheard the wrong conversation or seen the wrong document. Oh, he stood, moving closer. I know how this sounds. I know what I'm asking. Madam met his gaze, seeing not the polished, a stranger from the waterfront, but someone as trapped as she was. When do we start? Relief flickered across his features. Tonight. But Hannah, he paused, something shifting in his expression. There's one more thing you should know about me. Before she could ask what, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and the color drained from his face. What is it? He showed her the screen, a photo of her apartment building, smoke pouring from a third-floor window. We're too late, he said. They've already made their move. The apartment was gone. It's not just damaged or ransacked, but deliberately, methodically destroyed. Everything Hannah owned had been reduced to ash and twisted metal, the message clear: you cannot hide. She stood in the parking lot across the street, watching firefighters finish their work, feeling strangely detached. Instead, she felt oddly freed, as if the last anchor to her old life had been cut. "I'm sorry," Ethan said beside her. "I should have moved faster. It's just stuff." The words surprised her with their truth. "Most of it reminded me of things I'd rather forget anyway." They drove to Huang and Associates in silence, the office building empty except for security guards who nodded at Ethan's forged credentials. Hannah's keycard still worked, a detail that felt surreal given everything that had happened. The third floor. Office space looked exactly as she had left it 2 years ago. Clean lines, functional elegance, Marcus's personal touches carefully integrated into the design. But now she saw it through different eyes, searching for hiding places instead of aesthetic choices. He was methodical, she said, running her hand along the built-in shelving. Everything had a purpose. If he hid something, it would be somewhere that served a double function. They searched for 2 hours, finding nothing but normal office supplies and outdated files. Hannah was beginning to think they were wasting time when her fingers caught on something behind Marcus's desk. A small panel in the wall, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to press. "Here," she breathed. The panel slid away to reveal a narrow cavity containing a single USB drive and a folded piece of paper. Ethan reached for it, but Hannah's hand closed over his wrist. "What was the other thing?" she asked. "What didn't you tell me earlier?" His hand stilled under hers. "Hannah, no more secrets. Not now." He turned to face her fully, and she saw something break in his expression. "My real name isn't Ethan Whitmore. It's Ethan Volkov. And the man who's trying to kill us is my father." The words hit her like a physical blow. She dropped his wrist. "Stepping back, your father, Dmitry Volkov, runs the Seattle operations for the Bratva. Marcus and I were supposed to be his clean front, legitimate businessmen who could move money without attracting attention. But we started skimming, planning to disappear with enough to start over somewhere else." Hannah's mind reeled. "You're Russian mob royalty, and you've been stealing from your own family? They're not my family. They're criminals who bought me from an orphanage when I was 12 because I was good with numbers." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Right. I've been planning my escape for 20 years." She wanted to run, should have run, but something in his tone stopped her. The carefully controlled mask had slipped, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "Why didn't you leave without the money?" "Because Marcus has a daughter, had a daughter, her college fund, his wife's medical bills for her cancer treatment. Everything was tied up in accounts my father controlled. We couldn't leave them with nothing." The paper in the cavity was a letter in Marcus's careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, they found us. The evidence is in the last place they'd look. E knows where. Tell my family I tried to do the right thing." "What does he mean? You know where?" Ethan closed his eyes. "There's only one place Marcus knew that my father would never search." Opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "The cemetery where my mother is buried. The woman my father killed when I was 8. Before Hannah could respond, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, casting everything in eerie red glow. "We need to go," Ethan said, but it was already too late. The elevator chimed, and footsteps echoed in the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. "Ethan," called a voice with a thick Russian accent. "Enough games. Eat the girl and come home." Hannah pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. Ethan moved to stand between her and the door, his entire posture changing from businessman to something far more dangerous. "There's a service elevator," he whispered. "Back corner, behind the reception desk. Get to the parking garage and take my car. If I don't follow in 10 minutes, drive to the cemetery and find what Marcus hid. I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are," he turned, cupping her face in his hands.
Ass.
"Because if you stay, they'll use you to control me, and everything Marcus died for will be worthless." The footsteps were getting closer. Hannah could hear voices now, men coordinating positions. He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, and full of everything they might never have the chance to say. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing with something that looked like love and felt like goodbye. "Go," he whispered. She went. Service elevator was ancient and slow, each floor feeling like an eternity. Behind her, she heard shouting, then a gunshot that made her knees buckle. The parking garage was dark and empty, except for Ethan's sedan, keys exactly where he'd said they would be. She was pulling out of the garage when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have your boyfriend. Cemetery. Midnight. Come alone. Duh. Or we start mailing pieces." Hannah stared at the message, hands shaking. She had 9 hours, too. Find whatever Marcus had hidden and figure out how to save a man who might already be dead. But first, she had to decide if Ethan Volkov was worth dying for. The cemetery was older than Seattle itself, a sprawling hillside of weathered stones and ancient trees. Hannah found the grave by the light of her phone. Alina Volkova, beloved mother. 1965 to 1993. Fresh flowers lay against the headstone. White roses that couldn't have been there more than a few days. She knelt beside the grave, running her hands over the earth until her fingers found what they were looking for, a small metal box buried just deep enough to avoid casual discovery. Inside was another USB drive in a thick manila envelope marked with Marcus's handwriting for Hannah Grace, if the worst happens. The envelope contained photographs, bank records, and transcribed conversations that painted a picture of systematic money laundering, human trafficking, and murder spanning 2 decades. But it was the final document that made her blood run cold. A contract, signed by Dmitry Volkov, detailing the purchase of a 12-year-old boy from a Moscow orphanage. Ethan hadn't lied. If anything, he had understated the horror of his childhood. Hannah checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes to get to the meeting point. A derelict warehouse on the south side of the cemetery. She could call the police. But the evidence suggested Dmitry had cops on his payroll. She could run, disappear into the night with enough documentation to bring down an entire criminal empire. Or she could walk into what was almost certainly a trap and try to save the man who had shown her what it meant to be seen for who she truly was. The choice, she realized, had never really been a choice at all. The warehouse was lit by a single floodlight that created more shadows than it eliminated. Hannah approached the main entrance, the manila envelope clutched against her chest like armor. The door was unlocked. Inside, Ethan knelt in the center of the vast space, hands zip-tied behind his back, blood trickling from a split lip. 3 men stood around him, but Hannah only had eyes for the 4th figure, Dmitry Volkov. He was smaller than she had expected, compact and well-dressed, with silver hair and the kind of calm that came from absolute power. When he smiled at her, it was almost grandfatherly. "Miss Grace, you are more resourceful than my son gave you credit for." "Let him go," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Show me what you found first." Hannah held up the envelope but didn't move closer. Everything Marcus gathered. Names, dates, financial records, enough to put you away for life. Dmitry laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think this is about prison? You think any of this matters to me?" He gestured to one of his men, who pressed a gun to Ethan's temple. "My son has been planning to betray me for years. I've known this. What I did not know was how far he was willing to go, how much he was willing to sacrifice." Dmitry's eyes never left Hannah's face. "I see. He would sacrifice everything for you. He barely knows me. And yet here you are." Ethan raised his head, meeting her gaze across the distance. His eyes were bright with something that might have been pride. "Hannah, don't," he said. "Whatever you found, give it to the FBI. Let me go." "It's touching," Dmitry said, "but incomplete. You see, Miss Grace, I am not here to negotiate. I am here to teach my son a final lesson about the cost of betrayal." The sound of sirens filled the air, distant, but growing closer. Dmitry's expression flickered with annoyance. "It seems you were more resourceful than I thought." Hannah smiled, feeling strangely calm. "I called them before I came. Everything in this envelope is already in federal hands. Killing us won't change that. Perhaps not. but it will satisfy me. The gun moved from Ethan's head to point directly at Hannah. She saw Ethan's muscles tense, saw him prepare to throw himself forward despite the restraints. "Stop," she said, looking directly at Dmitri. "You want to hurt him? Then let him live with knowing he failed to save me." "Hannah, no." Ethan's voice broke. But she was already moving, lunging not away from the gun but toward it, throwing herself. Between the weapon and the man she realized she loved, the shot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. The impact spun her around, sending her to her knees. With the ringing in her ears, she heard Ethan screaming her name, heard more gunshots as tactical teams flooded the warehouse. The pain was distant, unreal, as important than the sight of Ethan breaking free from his restraints and crawling toward her across the concrete floor. "You idiot," he whispered, pressing his hands against the wound in her shoulder. "You beautiful, brave idiot. Is it over?"
"Why?"
she asked. "It's over." 6 months later, Hannah stood in the kitchen of a small house overlooking Puget Sound, watching Ethan read the morning paper at their table. The federal case had been thorough and devastating. Dmitry Volkov would spend the rest of his life in prison. The Witness Protection Program had offered them new identities, new lives, but they had chosen to stay and rebuild instead. Ethan looked up from the paper, catching her stare. "What?" "Just thinking about that day in the church. How Daniel's text said he couldn't marry someone like me." And Hannah smiled, touching the scar on her shoulder that had become a reminder not of pain, but of choice. He was right. He couldn't, because someone like me was always meant for someone like you. Ethan rose from his chair, crossing to wrap his arms around her waist. Someone stubborn and reckless with terrible timing. Someone who sees what matters and isn't afraid to fight for it. He kissed her then, and she tasted forever in the warmth of his mouth, the promise of a love that had been forged in fire and tempered by truth. Outside, the morning sun painted the water gold, and somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing. Asterisk, don't forget to like this video if it touched your heart. Subscribe for more inspiring stories and share to spread kindness.